Yes, I mean, it's a commonplace, of course, to start a lecture by saying that the speaker doesn't need to be introduced, but Pierre Rosenberg, I don't think you need to be introduced, especially in Cambridge, because you gave the Slade lectures here. You were a Slade professor in 1986-87, and of course, they led to the great Fragonard exhibition and to the great Fragonard catalogue. You were also a visiting fellow at King's College at this point, but you don't need introduction either because, of course, you are such a major figure in art history. You probably, and I thought about it a lot overnight, I think you probably published more than any art historian, any living art historian I can think about, and also much better than most. And but of course, I mean, Pierre Rosenberg is a great, great specialist, not only of, but especially of 17th and 18th century French art. I mean, he has worked on basically every artist I can think about. And, for example, published with Jean-Louis Praz, the catalogue raisonné of the drawings by Poussin. And now, of course, he's working on the catalogue raisonné of Poussin's drawings. I mean, Pierre Rosenberg's role was leading, as I showed, in the development of art history in France, which is a relatively recent development. I mean, you know, in England, it really started with the arrival of the emigres and with the German emigres in the 30s. In France, there was an extraordinary boost in something like your professional lifespan. And of course, you started working at the Louvre, Cabinet des Dessins and Cabinet des Peintures. And then, of course, Pierre Rosenberg was director of the Louvre from 1994 to 2001. And of course, you know, the Louvre not only is an extremely important museum, but it's also a museum which has an enormous importance in France because of its link with the provincial museums, and of course at the same time that raising the level of the Louvre through interesting, wonderful acquisitions, exhibitions and so on, it is something which also had, and that is quite specific to France, I think, a real influence in the provinces as well. I mean, just think the number of exhibitions you did there, and just think, for those of you who don't know French so well, I mean, the French provincial museums are one of the greatest assets. Of course, Pierre Rosenberg has been also instrumental in the creation of the Institut National d'Histoire de l'Art, which in 10 years maybe, has established itself as one of the buoyant, maybe the most buoyant art historical institute anywhere. But I think in fact, having you here is a great chance because, of course, we have you for these lectures, but since we invited you to give these lectures, of course, the Fitzlium Museum has acquired a major Poussin. And I'm sure you all know it. In 2012, the Fitzlium was able to acquire Poussin's masterpiece, the Extreme Unction, from a set of the 7 Sacrements. And I think this will be discussed in the second lecture of the series. Pierre Rosenberg's lecture today will discuss Poussin's 3 paintings of the story of Eliezer and Rebecca. One of these, of course, is in Cambridge since 1984, when it was bought from the collection of Professor Anthony Blunt, who too, of course, had Cambridge connections. So, Professor Rosenberg, à vous.
Thank you so much for your very nice words. I have to apologize for my poor English, but I mean, I hope you will forget me for this, my accent and so on. First, some words about Poussin, before speaking, of course, of your marvelous Eliezer and Rebecca. He was born in Normandy in 1500. You have on the screen. Thank you. Have to brush. You have on the screen his self-portrait, done in 1650. Which of course you know, all of you know. He was born in Normandy, and one of the questions which remains a very open question is about his form. How did he become a painter? As you know, he arrived in Rome in 1624. He was 30 years old, and in a certain way, there was a big discussion. There is still a big discussion about his beginnings. 30 years in the 17th century is the beginning of a big age in a certain way. Everyone's is of course very much aware that he became very quickly very famous in Rome, but what was he doing before his arrival in Rome. So, I mean, I'm showing you first of all, yes, a picture which is still in the church of the city where he was born, Les Andelys, Quentin Varin, which is, as you see, a quite interesting picture, but not at all a masterpiece. And I'm presenting you a second picture that we know Poussin admired very, very much by Pourbus, but still there. I mean, what were his beginnings? What did he do before 1624 is a great mystery. If I'm speaking of this picture, it's because of this picture. This picture is, which I will see tomorrow in London, which I know before, which I'd seen before, is a very problematic picture which has been ascribed to early Poussin, but of course without any proof. It was an intuition of some art historians. Was it Poussin? Was it not Poussin? It's connected with a group of drawings which are kept in Windsor, done for Marino Marini, very major figure for Poussin, for the beginnings of Poussin in Paris. But in a certain way, it was until very recently an attribution, a very clever attribution, a very audacious attribution, but nothing more than an attribution. I'm myself a great attribution friend, but still it was an attribution. By chance, I discovered quite recently, and within the last 6 months, an archive document proving that this picture is really by Poussin. So in a certain way, we have now the beginning of the possibility of reconstructing the first years of Poussin, and that is a quite big issue. Of course, we discovered quite recently a picture which we did know about. It's a picture we did know that he did for Notre Dame de Paris, which is the Cathedral of Paris, a picture of the Death of the Virgin, also before going to Rome. The picture had disappeared, was discovered in Belgium quite recently, also there. So you see this great mystery of what was Poussin before 624 begins to be no more such a mystery. And of course, when he arrives to Rome, he is quite different. That's, of course, the very famous Martyrdom of St. Erasmus, which is at Vatican, painted in 627, and which is a famous picture, a great commission received for the Cathedral of Rome, I mean, for St. Peter in Rome, a great commission. But you see there, you have what will be the great Poussin of later. But the gap between the departure to Rome and what he did before and what he does in arriving in Rome is very big. And one has to ask oneself how important was the discovery of Rome for him. The discovery of Rome for him was crucial, absolutely fundamental, and made of him a great artist. What he did before in Paris is not at all without any importance. And so in a certain way, one has to think how quickly this transformation took place, what happened exactly, and one has a little bit to understand what happened in this moment between 26, 24, 25, 26, to think to Van Gogh in a certain way, who also in a way, when he arrives in Paris, he becomes a completely different artist very quickly. So the same happened in a certain way to Poussin, this big transformation. I mean, I will be very quick about, of course, the career of Poussin, because you know everything yourself about the life of this great man. Of course, here you have the Death of Germanicus, who made Poussin painted for the Barberini and for the court of Urban VIII, and which in a day made Poussin famous in a certain way. The picture was admired. It remains in the 17th and the 18th, 19th century a very crucial picture. Everyone who went to Rome did. It's for us a little bit more difficult to understand the greatness of the picture, but it was such an unanimous admiration of everyone in a certain way. Why? Because it's the story told, the death of Germanicus, his wife who's crying, and so on, and the way in which she approached the tragic event and the way in which she painted it in a very classical way was completely new in Rome and made a sort of revolution. But I will be very quick on the life of Poussin. Very quickly, of course, here we are in front of a picture you know very well, which is the National Gallery in London, famous because painted for Richelieu, the Cardinal de Richelieu, and very famous also there. One sees this great iconographic ambition, this tremendous knowledge of which I mean, Poussin comes from a very simple family. His father was a peasant, a soldier peasant, and so in a way this man who read Latin, who had such a tremendous knowledge of antiquity, who had this culture in a way, one is wondering how and where and when he was able to learn all of this. It's a very crucial picture, of course, a little bit too heavy, too many figures. It's not the great Poussin I like, but still, of course, a major work, and in a certain way, still quite connected with what was painted in Rome in this year, but we will see with the years he has no connection anymore, nor with France, nor with Italy. Well, here, of course, the very famous Arcadian shepherds, just painted before his trip to Paris in 4042. A very famous picture also, very loved by specialists of iconography and of iconology, more perhaps loved because of the story told there, the discovery of death in the Roman Campania. What even in Arcadia, death is there. That means all of us can be touched by death. And you see the one discovering the letters, the other one has understood what it meant. The woman, which has given to tremendous a lot of interpretation, is including recently by Claude Lévi-Strauss. You see there, of course, the questioning and the moral aspect of that was so important for Poussin. You will hear that all on my papers. You will hear among the lectures of Thursday afternoon two French men speaking about Poussin and God. They are very much convinced that Poussin was before all a devote, which is not at all the ideas of Blount, for whom Poussin was a Stoic, a man of philosophy and Stoic man. Not at all also the Poussin, more recent Poussin, which I myself am very much in favor of a reader of Montaigne. We know that Poussin read Montaigne, which is quite interesting in a certain way for a 17th century artist to read Montaigne, who is not such an easy writer to read, but is of course crucial and very much beloved in England, I know. In any case, if I'm speaking of this picture and if I'm speaking about Poussin and God, it's because I saw quite recently Bonnefoy, the French poet, now 90 years old, a great poet, a great translator of English literature, a great translator of English, and a great admirer of Yeats and so on. And when I told him that these two young people, you will see them Thursday afternoon, speaking about Poussin and God, convinced that Poussin was a devote, he said, the painter who painted the Arcadian shepherd is not the painter of God. I mean, I leave this open to you and you can make control of it. A little bit more, he went to Paris in 1640, asked by the king, that means Louis XIII, and by Richelieu. He was not at all willing to come to Paris. He resisted as much as he could, but at the end, the hand, as he writes himself, of the king is so powerful that he could not resist to the, and he arrived in Paris where he was acclaimed, made a lot of money. Poussin was not against winning a lot of money. He was from Normandy, after all, and in a certain way, his trip in Paris was half a success, but more, I would say, not such a success in a certain way. And as quickly as he could, he went back to Rome. His wife was ill. He married in 1630 Anne Duguay, who was the sister of a Duguay painter. A strange marriage in a certain way. She was 17 years old. They had no children. And one of the questions which I don't have the answer is, he had, when he arrived in Rome, we know that he was quite ill. He had a syphilis, it said so, something of this sort. And was he impotent? I mean, it's very strange for a 17th century artist marrying a young girl of 17 years old not to have children. So this is a point, a quite important point in a certain way, which remains mysterious in a certain way. Paris, in any case. And the other self-portrait, the one in Berlin, uses the two aspects of a man, very proud man, very sure of himself, of his greatness. In this year, Poussin was really very, we are in 1650, highly famous, and in a certain way, one went to see him walking in the streets of Rome. The tourists had to see him walking in the streets of Rome because he was such a glory, such a famous man. There, of course, I'm showing you this very famous picture. You see the picture completely out of everything you could have seen in a Roman picture of the 17th century. The very famous Orion from the Metropolitan. You see this giant walking into this fantastic landscape. Landscape is not the word I would like to use. Painter Poussin is not a landscape painter. He paints nature. Nature is something for him absolutely more important than the description of what he sees. What's more important is the seasons, the transformation of the days, and so on. I mean, always this idea of time and of eternity. Well, just to a last image, the four seasons, of course, which are very much discussed, and in this moment there are 3 books in preparation on the seasons. One done by the persons you will see on Thursday. The second one done also by 2 done by the persons coming on Thursday afternoon, and the third one, which I know very recently will become out quite soon, done by what I think is one of the remaining great scholars of the oldest generation. I'm speaking of Willibald Sauländer. He wrote me quite recently a letter last week, a typed letter, typed machine, typed letter. And my secretary said it was astonished, not so much because of the letter, which was a very nice and very charming letter written in French, by the fact that it was a typed letter. She had never seen a typed letter. I mean, so in any case. As you can see, I'm quite interested in Poussin, and I have to say some words about this. I have written, my first exhibit, I did 4 exhibitions on Poussin. The first one, 1961, in Rouen, Poussin et son temps, which was with 2 introductions, one by Blunt, Professor Anthony Blunt, as I have heard one should say, the other one by Jacques Tuillier, so 61. I did the second Poussin exhibition in Rome, asked by Balthus to do so in 77 and in 78 in Rome and Düsseldorf. The third one was a great Paris exhibition, 94, 95. And the fourth one was recently in Bilbao and New York. So I've written all my life long about Poussin. This is a recent catalogue I did about the Midas in Ajaccio, which has been stolen and recovered. And this is the cover of the catalogue raisonné of the drawings of which Jean-Michel Montias spoke quite recently. So an old interest in Poussin. And now, of course, I'm trying to do a catalogue raisonné of his pictures, which is a huge work. The only catalogue raisonné in existence until now, which is we can really be considered as a catalogue raisonné, is one by Sir Anthony Blunt, published in 1966 and 1967. Since then, the literature on Poussin has increased 3 or 4 times. It's still a huge literature in Blunt's book, but still then lots of things have changed. I will speak a little bit more about Blunt's ambition in 66, 67, and my ambitions, and of what has happened in the last lecture, of course. Blunt's catalogue raisonné is ordered by subject, by theme. I will, of course, I will do my best to present the catalogue on chronological order. But I mean, still, Blunt's book remains the only real great book on Poussin that one can use still now with great achievement. My book will be far bigger, of course. Well, I'm sure of one thing, it can be as bad as it can be. Everyone will be obliged to use it for 50 years, that I'm sure. Let us now go to the theme of my lecture, that means Eliezer and Rebecca. First of all, I think, as I'm very bad in reading in English, I will ask my wife to read the Bible. Her English is better than my one, and the Bible has to be read carefully and not by someone speaking.
Okay. So this is the story of Eliezer and Rebecca in Genesis 24, 15:27, and it's in the translation of the New International Version. Before he had finished praying, Rebecca came out with her jar on her shoulder. She was the daughter of Bethuel, son of Milcah, who was the wife of Abraham's brother Nahor. The woman was very beautiful, a virgin. No man had ever slept with her. She went down to the spring, filled her jar, and came up again. The servant hurried to meet her and said, "Please, give me a little water from your jar." "Drink, my lord," she said, and quickly lowered the jar to her hands and gave him a drink. After she had given him a drink, she said, "I'll draw water for your camels too, until they have had enough to drink." So she quickly emptied her jar into the trough, ran back to the well to draw more water, and drew enough for all his camels. Without saying a word, the man watched her closely to learn whether or not the Lord had made his journey successful. When the camels had finished drinking, the man took out a gold nose ring weighing a becker and 2 gold bracelets weighing 10 shekels. Then he asked, "Whose daughter are you? Please tell me, is there room in your father's house for us to spend the night?" She answered him, "I am the daughter of Bethuel, the son that Milcah bore to Nahor." And she added, "We have plenty of straw and fodder, as well as room for you to spend the night." Then the man bowed down and worshipped the Lord, saying, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not abandoned his kindness and faithfulness to my master. As for me, the Lord has led me on the journey to the house of my master's relatives."
Thank you. Well, it's a very beautiful text, of course, but I think few artists have been able to translate the Bible as well as Poussin was able to do so. He painted the picture in 1648 for Jean Pointel, who was in Rome when Poussin painted it. We know that the picture, Pointel kept the picture until his death in 1660, where it was appraised £1,200, livres. Interesting, the appraisal was made by 2 artists, 17th century French artists of the time, among them Philippe de Champaigne, who was a friend of Poussin. They met in Paris before Poussin left for Rome. The picture, the story of the picture is quite amusing, because at the death of Pointel, the picture was bought by not the cardinal, by the Duke of Richelieu, who was the nephew of the cardinal. The Duke of Richelieu was a great collector of Poussin before being the greatest collector of Rubens of his time in France. But something strange happened to him. The 20th of December, 1665, he had to pay a tennis part, jeu de paume, a jeu de paume with the king. And the subject of the tennis game was the best pictures of Richelieu collection. And of course, he lose. And so the king asked in exchange for the 25 best of his picture, the Poussins. He owned 25 pictures, among them 13 Poussins, the seasons among others, and this one among. So of course, in fact, the tennis game was a pure arrangement, if I can say so, because the king could not buy from one of his great lords pictures. The trade money was not part of the relationship between kings, so they had to find an invention to make things official. And in exchange of having given his Poussins to the king, the Duke of Richelieu received 50,000 pounds. So it's how the Louvre became, how Louis XIV began to build his huge collection of Poussins. The 26th of December, 65 is, why did I mention the date? Because 65 is also the year of the death of Poussin. And 65 is also the year in which Bernini came to Paris, invited by Louis XIV, and he spends his time not only in doing the bust of the king, but mostly to see Poussin's picture. So I will go back to this point, because it's such moving and so interesting also for artists to see the symbol of Baroque art in love with the symbol of classicism. I don't like very much both words, classicism and Baroque, but I mean to see Bernini looking at every picture that he could see by Poussin is quite moving. The picture became, of course, very famous. You own in Cambridge a copy of it, which I've not seen, but which I think is hanging in the galleries now, perhaps, I don't know. I will see this very soon. A quite good copy, of course. He, in a certain way, he he painted this picture for Pointel for also another reason. He had just finished the second set of the Sacrements, of which I will speak next week on Monday. And the Sacrements, of course, are very sad subjects. They are very somber and sinister. So he had his mind. He had to change his mind to make a pleasant picture. And he said himself he had to paint a tableau gracieux rempli de plusieurs filles dans lesquelles on peut remarquer différentes beautés. He had to paint a gracious picture where a lot of young girls of different beauties. And in fact, one of the interpretations of the picture done by the present, especially people in love with iconography, is to insist on the beauty of the girls. What does one see on the picture? A man with a turban. I'm sorry for this image, which is here. Well, he had just painted one of these tragic pictures, the picture which is in poor condition, this crucifixion, which is an absolutely moving picture, a tragic picture, one of the most beautiful crucifixion existing. And to change his mind, he, same year, 48, he decided to paint this Eliezer and Rebecca, who is absolutely the reverse of what you see. What do you see on the picture? You see Eliezer with Rebecca. He is dressed as an Oriental and has a sword on his side and arrows next to him. He's there offering to a young girl bracelets and a ring. She looks a little bit she looks surprised and seems to say, "Why have I been chosen?" This sudden elevation is for her such a surprise. There is a sort of grace and so obvious there, and smiling, etc. Little observation, you will see why. You see the jug, the jar at her feet, and there you see also her hands here, the movements, the ring, and the hand on the breast. And you will see. I will show you more details about this. About the picture. Another detail. Here we are coming back to the picture as an entire picture, because you have to see there is a pond which has its importance. Also, you will see why quite soon. You don't see, I should have said it a little bit so, no camels on the picture. You will see camels later on, and I will go back to the camels quite soon. No camels. In fact, you don't need to see the camels here. See the jars, the jug. 10. You have to try to find them yourself on the picture. 10 jars. You see how different they are. 10 jars. And, well, you see the one I like very much with this jar there, two hands, you look also at the expression. Some of the girls are surprised, they don't understand what's happening. Some others are beginning to understand what is happening. So you see it's quite different in a certain way from one figure to the other. Here you see 3 jugs together and all the movements of the hands between them. One, of course, you see the jar is too empty in a certain way. Water is falling out of it, and she says, "Stop, stop!" And you see, it's done. But she, of course, you don't see her here, is surprised, and the surprise explained in a certain way why her jar is beginning to be so empty. See, you see, I like very much, of course, the girl there, which looks at us. She's part of the picture, but is not part of the picture together. She's part of the picture, of course, clearly, but she looks at us to say, you are assisting at someone quite exceptional. She's in a certain way the go-between between the picture and the spectator, between us. I like her very much, of course, and of course her position is quite impressive also. So you see in a certain way, and of course there are many details which have been discussed. Here you have, for instance, this sort of strange monuments there. You see, we are also late evening. The sun is falling on the wall, And this ball has been, and this has been explained in very different ways. I think a very recent interpretation, given by one of the persons who will be speaking on Thursday, on next week, is the right one. It's a millennium, that means a stone one, making a sort of frontier between the two worlds in a certain way that the Bible is describing in a certain way, this world where Eliezer tries to find a wife to Isaac, the son of Abraham, and where he's going quite far to find her. So I think this is a quite good explanation of what this object means. One has never to forget that in each picture of Poussin, there is not a single piece which has not his meaning. Sometimes one should not be too. Sometimes a quite far-fetched meaning. One should not go too far, and I'm among the people not going too far in this field. But still, I have never left things without meaning, as Poussin says more or less himself. So when something is strange on a picture, one has to work hard to find what it means, and one finds it. It's a little bit pedantic, perhaps. It has been reproached to Poussin, but it's part of his greatness. Let us go back to the figures. You see the expressions are so different from one to the other. The word I was trying to find before is a sort of milestone. For the expressions are so different between the ones wondering, the ones not understanding. So in a certain way, each face has its proper signification. The same being true here in a certain way. And of course, I'm not insisting on the beauties of the colors, the variety of the colors, the incredibly softness of the movement, the sort of peaceful feeling one has in front of the picture. Why did Poussin paint the picture? We know this. For once, the things are quite clear. Cardinal Mazarino, in French Mazarin, had bought a very famous picture by Guido Reni, the Education of the Virgin, and in a way, Pointel was quite jealous of this picture and quite admiring this picture. By the way, you know that Poussin was a greater admirer, and this was not the rule at this time in Rome, of Domenichino than of Guido Reni. In fact, he was a sort of competitor of Guido Reni. He was not able, Poussin, to paint ceilings as Guido Reni did marvelously well everywhere in Florence and in Rome, clearly. He would not have been able to do such ceilings. And in fact, he proves that he was not able to do so, not being successful with the decoration of the Grande Galerie in the Louvre. But in a certain way, this picture was in a certain way Poussin had to do a sort of competition with this picture and had to do another aspect of life of the Christ, of life of Christ. Here it's a young Christ, that I mean in a certain way, it's a story of the Christ later on, if I can say so. Between the Christ, the Old Testament and the New Testament, there's always, with Poussin, always a sort of willingness to combine both, to play on the part, or to make the story of the New Testament and the Bible combine very much one to the other. I mean, one of the ideas about Poussin is that he was very much attached not only to the Old Testament and the New Testament, but also the old religions. He was quite knowledgeable about what one did know in his years about Egyptians' thinkings and so on. So he himself lived in a very learned milieu, the court of Urban VIII, people very much interested in esoteric things and so on. The picture itself, of course, became very famous. I could quote many people speaking about it with great admiration. It was copied by Ingres, you see here, in a copy which is in Marseille. And of course was also very much admired by a great admirer of Poussin, Picasso, and the very famous picture by Picasso in New York, which is clearly, without any doubt, painted with knowledge about Poussin. The theme himself of the picture, and this has been clearly proved by Glynn in 1975, the theme of the Eliezer and Rebecca is, of course, the theme of the Annunciation. And it's clearly a sort of annunciation of the Annunciation. And of course, it deals mostly with what was for Poussin and for the 17th century something absolutely crucial for the spirituality of the 17th century, the theme of providence and of grace. Providence, this girl who became such an important figure of the Bible on one hand, and of the grace coming by miracle in a certain way on this quite unknown girl. So this theme of the providence and of the grace, which does not mean very much more for us nowadays, was for Poussin absolutely crucial. I will end this part of my lecture devoted to the Louvre picture by quoting Chanteloup and Poussin, of course. Quoting Poussin as Chanteloup, the beautiful girls that you will have seen in Nîmes did not, I'm sure, please you any less than the beautiful columns of the Maison Carrée, since the latter are only old copies of the former. Which is a marvelous quotation. I mean, this parallel between columns and girls, the girls you just saw in the pictures, which are, of course, the girls of the antiquity, of which Poussin is a sort of revival. Well, Poussin painted twice more, two other, Eliezer and Rebecca, two or more. The first one is this picture, which was owned by Sir Denis Mahon, a name one should not mention together with the name of Blunt, but I mean, we'll go better on this problem later on. He bought the picture in 1964 in a sale in London as Pietro Testa. He published the picture. He sold the picture in 1977 to the trade in New York, where the picture still is. The picture was painted very early, just at the arrival of Poussin in Rome in 24-25. Of course, the beauty of the picture is not as great, of course, as the Louvre picture. It's really the beginnings of Poussin, where he is still in troubles with composition and so on. But one thing one should mention immediately is you see a pond there. Of course, you will see the camels. I will go back on them quite soon. But you see the pond. And in fact, the picture was painted by one of the great patrons of Poussin, his greatest Roman patrons, Cassiano dal Pozzo, Dupuis, Pozzo. And of course, the French are calling him always Dupuis, le Chevalier Dupuis. And of course, there it's clear that the pond means something. And in fact, Poussin arrives in Rome after having tried twice to go to Rome without success. He had no luck in a way. When he arrives to Rome, Marino Marini, his great Parisian protector, died. When he arrived to Rome, the Cardinal Antonio Barberini left for a diplomatic trip to Spain and to France. So he arrives to Rome and was penniless at a point of and immediately he thought that he had to approach Cassiano, and he approached him in a certain way in painting this picture, which this allusion to Cassiano dal Pozzo. The picture, of course, is exactly the same subject of the ones you saw before. Not exactly, and I will go back to this because of the camels. You see, it's not a very successful picture. I understand in a certain way why, for so many years, Thuillier, Blunt did not accept it as put by Poussin. Now the attribution to Poussin is accepted by everyone. We know now that Poussin, when he arrives to Rome, was penniless, as I said before, had to make a living and painted too much, too quickly, too many pictures. Poussin was a man of few pictures. He painted 1 or 2 pictures a year. He was a slow painter. He needed to think to what every picture he did. He had to take time. But to find his speed, that means his slowness, to find his also his format of picture, he had to wait a little bit. First, because he did not know himself what was his real greatness, and secondly, because for many years, for 3-4 years, he had to make his living selling to everyone possible pictures he did. So in a way, the first pictures, I mean, for myself, Poussin between 24, let us say 28, 29, painted as many pictures than between 29 and his death in 1965. So a huge production of pictures of uneven quality, You saw the death of Germanicus, who of course is not which is a great picture, but many pictures with such weaknesses as this one, but where the hand of Poussin is unmistakable, is sure. In this case, there is even some proof which has been founded later on. There is on the back of the picture an inscription proving the provenance of Cassiano, and also we know through the Cassiano dal Pozzo inventories, numerous Cassiano dal Pozzo inventories, a lot of work for me to try to reconstruct them, a huge work, I can assure you to you, and where one finds a picture going from one to the other inventory. So you see a picture which, of course, is not in perfect condition, but still with a sort of construction without any deep in a certain way, but still something quite new compared to what was done in Rome in the same years. The picture had a pendant, which of course is representing, for obvious reason, the woman of Samaria. This picture has disappeared. That is the only image I have of it, and it was owned in 27. And this is the publicity coming from the Burlington magazine of 27. The publicity, it was owned by this dealer, Max Rothschild. We have all tried since years to find it back. It's somewhere hidden in England, I'm sure. Where, I would like to know. And if you know about the picture, please let me know. In any case, 26, in fact, you see very well, of course, it's the same idea of pendant, of a pendant picture. The mound picture, as I said before, is now for sure one of the early pictures by Poussin. We know more now about this picture, about copies and so on. Strangely enough, the great rival of Maun had also a picture of the same subject. It's a picture you know very well because it's hanging since, I think, 1984 in your museum, and which is a very, very beautiful picture. This picture was came from Professor Anthony Blunt's collection. We know that he bought it in 1933. He was 26 years old. He paid for it £100. This £100 had been lent to him, where they reimbursed, I cannot assure you, by Victor Rothschild. Nothing to do with Rothschild you saw before. And he lent to Blunt £100 to buy the picture. I don't know how things happened in a certain way. And of course, it is of a complete different moment of the career of Poussin. It's a very late picture, one of the last pictures he did. Is it unfinished? Or not, but in any case, you see that the mood in which this picture is painted is completely different. When you have seen the Louvre picture before, you see where people were very much connected, each with the others. There was a sort of game of dance of the figures between them, a sort of harmony between them, a sort of willingness to do a unique picture where everyone had to play with the other. The eyes, there was all a game of looks between. Here, everyone is alone. Everyone is alone. You see Eliezer binding down before Rebecca, people leaving. Of course, you have some jars there also, but very few. It's a complete different mood of it. And I would say, and the colors, of course, the sort of pastel colors are also quite different from the 48 version we have here. The picture should have been painted between 63, I would say 63. That means 15 years later than the Louvre picture. It's a great picture. It's not an easy picture to understand because Poussin was ill. His hands were shaking. He had, as I said before, this illness, and he could not have in hands. He was very much ill. So the picture has weaknesses, but there is a sort of greatness. The technical difficulties are overcome by something greater. That means the idea of the event, which you feel there in a very powerful way. The event, the miraculous event, is there very obvious. And the face of Rebecca also, in a certain way, proves it. In fact, in this case, there was also a pendant. Not exactly a pendant, but another picture representing the woman of Samaria. And the picture is lost, not known. One knows this engraving, and one knows also copies. It's this picture was in this time painted for the wife of Chanteloup, Monsieur de Chanteloup, Madame de Chanteloup, and was appraised very highly at the death of Chanteloup in 1694, £3,000. It was, of course, a very impressive picture. I will show you very soon a copy of it. But the picture has still to be discovered. There is a strange figure on the right of the engraving, and on the left of the copies. You see the very strange picture. You see this sort of a woman in white, dressed in white, veiled, at the entry of a grotto. What does this picture mean? It is the fact that the encounter between Christ and the Samaria woman took place next to the tomb of Joseph, son of Jacob. And this wife is a symbol of the Old Testament and of death, in opposition to the New Testament and to the pond source of life. So you see there also a detail which adds to the picture something what first appearance would not have proved. I would like to end this lecture with two different points. Blunt, as I said before, was the great Poussin expert. He worked on Poussin since before the war, publishing a lot of articles and a lot of on every aspect of Poussin's thinking about it. He decided to do a catalogue raisonné, as I said before, and did on Poussin the Mellon lectures in Washington in '58. In 1960, he was the major figure of the Poussin exhibition at the Louvre. At the same moment, there was a big symposium, '58, but published only in 1960, about bringing together a lot of younger scholars on Poussin. And at the same moment appeared Denis Marne. He was not Sir Denis for the moment. And he wrote 2 or 3 violent articles criticizing violently Poussin's approach on chronology and on attribution and so on. And Blunt, who thought that his book was finished and was ready to publish it in '60, began to rewrite his book, who was in fact published only in 1966 and '67, as I said before, in 2 years. So you see the arrival suddenly in Poussin's scholarship of a younger generation obliged Blunt to, in a certain way, revise completely his approach of Poussin. The second thing I would say concerns the camels. You see them on the first picture, or the first picture on the right, and you see them. Here they are. And as you know, when the Louvre picture arrived in Paris, there was a huge discussion at the Académie Royale de Peinture et de Sculpture. Why no camels on the picture? Why no camels? And there was a big discussion. Why no camels? Was it because camels are vulgar animals and that it would have been unpleasant on such a beautiful picture? Or did Poussin did not know the Bible? And so on. It's a huge discussion, and discussion especially between Lebrun on one hand and Philippe de Champaigne on the other hand. The Academy was full of etc., etc. In fact, Poussin had not to paint the camels on the Louvre picture because the event is not the same. Here, of course, on the 2 pictures you see here, you have the moment where Rebecca brings water to the camels. Of course, the moment chosen for the Louvre picture is a little bit later, so camels are not a necessity, an absolute necessity. In any case, the battle was very strong, and in a certain way, and you will excuse me to end with this little bit strange conclusion. There was a big battle between Blunt and Marne, and in the 17th century there was a big battle between Champaigne and Lebrun. Thank you so much.